Welcome to the week that was, but we mostly wish it wasn't, for the week ending September 5th, 2025. This is a weekly roundup of the highlights and lowlights of campus anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. This week I had about 40 stories to choose from. If something is happening in your neck of the woods, please be sure to let me know. I'm your host, Andrew Pessin. I am a professor, but please don't hate me. For more about me and my work, visit andrewpessin.com. For all the details of today's stories and loads more stories, follow me on X at Andrew Pessin. Today, I thought I would start with a quick quote. A woman named Melissa McEwen writes, as my friend Maud once said, there are times when you must speak, not because you're going to change the other person, but because if you don't speak, they have changed you. I find those wise and encouraging words in these dark and difficult and perilous times. All right, let's get to the news. Top stories of the week. We start with Harvard. A federal judge has ruled that the Trump administration's freezing of federal funds is illegal, violating Harvard's First Amendment rights, basically commentary, the right to allow and foster anti-Semitism on their campus. The Trump administration says they will appeal. There's still a long way to go on this case, but this is a victory for Harvard. Northwestern University, its president, Michael Schill, who had been much condemned for his failure to address anti-Semitism on that campus, has announced he is resigning after just 3 years in office. During his closed house testimony some weeks back, Schill was apparently asked that if he was disturbed that one of the professors that Northwestern had hired as part of their capitulation to the encampment protesters, he was informed that person had been hanging out with Sinwar in Gaza, the man who orchestrated the October 7th massacre. And Schill's response was, "I've never been to Gaza, but it's a pretty small place, and you're going to meet people and talk to people." So he's apparently okay with that professor. Columbia also had a busy week as usual. This week they tapped a radical anti-Israel professor who has accused the Jewish state of ethnic cleansing to lead their initiatives on meaningful dialogue. I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. Meanwhile, members of QAD, Columbia University Apartheid Divest, this coalition of very anti-Israel groups, that group itself has officially been suspended, but they don't bother to suspend the students who are in the group. So members of that group protested this week, first week of school over there, protested outside the Hillel Club Fair, giving out flyers urging Jewish students to drop Hillel because Hillel supports genocide. Similarly, another one of the members, an anti-Israel student, much in the news in the past year, was walking around with a very large sign saying, quote, "Some of your classmates were IOF, Israel Occupying Force, criminals committing genocide in Gaza." Columbia has announced an investigation into these incidents, apparently. At UC Berkeley this week, wanted posters were put up featuring Jewish Regents members Jay Shuris and Richard Leib. And you might remember that Shuris had his house personally vandalized a couple of months back, and recently lost a court case trying to get a restraining order against the head of the SJP there. University of Massachusetts Amherst is hosting a conference coming up in the near future, the Coalition of Women in German, but that conference has announced that it will exclude and boycott any and all scholars receiving funding from Israeli institutions, including cultural and academic institutions. The Brandeis Center is demanding that university leadership prevent this blatant and illegal national origin discrimination and flagrant violation of UMass policies. The university has announced that it will be reviewing the details here. The Anti-Defamation League put out a report with statistics about anti-Israel incidents on campuses and reveals that out of over 2,000 universities in the United States, only 10 were responsible for 15% of the incidents. Many of the leaders in the top 10 will be familiar: Columbia, UCLA, Michigan, Harvard, Rutgers, Berkeley, etc. UC Davis popped in at number 2, a bit of a dark horse there, a little bit under the radar. We need to pay more attention to that. UC Berkeley, also an engineering lecturer, has committed to a hunger strike in support of Gaza. They're saying that he will maintain the strike until the administration meets his 4 demands, which include acknowledging Israel's illegal occupation, apartheid, and genocide of Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. That's a quote from him, and so on. The latest absurd libel that's been making the rounds is that there are, quote, settler colonialist determinants of health, end quote, i.e., an effort to blame all Palestinian health problems on Israel. This particular one was recently debunked by pro-Israel blogger Elder of Zion, who shows with really just some minor research by a non-expert that excessive smoking is the major factor in poor Palestinian health outcomes. And in Congress this week, the House Appropriations Committee is considering a bill that would cut off funding for campuses that fail to address anti-Semitism. There was some BDS news this week, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. In the Netherlands, the University of Utrecht has announced a full boycott of all things Israeli, and the Scottish Parliament has voted to adopt BDS against Israel. In the K through 12 arena in Toronto, another Palestine resource for teachers document has been exposed, containing, of course, vile, one-sided anti-Israel propaganda to be disseminated to elementary school students. The Fresno, California School District has just hired a new chief information officer, a person who, a couple of weeks after the October 7th massacre by Hamas, reposted Iranian propaganda calling Israel a terrorist state and pushing genocide hashtags, genocide accusations against Israel, not against Hamas. Now this person is the voice of California's third largest school district. New York City schools have been giving space to something called woke kindergarten, a program that apparently glorifies martyrs, tells children to boycott Israel, kindergarten, and reduces and redefines violence as resistance. In the arena of professions and professional organizations, a very interesting and busy week. The main story of this one was, of course, the International Association of Genocide Scholars put out a statement at the start of the week, passing an absurd resolution in the name of these experts of genocide scholars, declaring Israel guilty of genocide and calling for various measures against Israel. It was, of course, filled with all sorts of fake news, false misrepresentations, a misrepresentation of the ICJ, International Court of Justice ruling last year, entirely leaves out any acknowledgement of Hamas's role in the destruction of Gaza, including the use of human shields and using hospitals and schools, etc., for military purposes, and even demanding that Israel provide measures to support democracy in Gaza, which alone tells you everything you need to know about this resolution. Well, that happened early in the week, but then subsequently, a member of the association put out a statement saying that the leadership pushed this resolution through entirely by not following normal protocols and procedures and not allowing any sort of discussion of it. And then after that, in response to this ludicrous statement, numerous pro-Israel people signed up to join the group and just become official genocide scholars, because it turns out this isn't an organization of experts. In fact, it was open membership to anyone who would pay $30, no credentials or publications in any way required. And it also turned out on further investigation that in the last 2 years, the membership of this group has ballooned as activists joined, including over 80 from Iraq, in order to do exactly this, use the name of this organization to put out an authoritative statement, quote unquote, authoritative statement on genocide. Amongst the many people who joined and became members by paying their $30, there was the Cookie Monster, Palestinian Hitler, and the Emperor Palpatine from the Star Wars saga. Some naughty professors this week, per usual. Johns Hopkins Medical School professor posted that Israel is a terrorist state and that Zionists are a scourge on humanity, and that our greatest ally, i.e., Israel, fights for the right to gang rape prisoners. Meanwhile, at San Francisco State University, a professor has been using her academic position to promote eliminationist rhetoric against Israel, organize BDS activity, and collaborate with extremist networks. This person spoke at this past week's People's Conference for Palestine, a very important thing that was meticulously documented. You should see what they're saying at that conference. And this professor said, "It's not a matter of if, but when Israel falls. From the ashes of this genocide, we will build liberation from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free." These are open calls for the eradication of the Jewish state and ultimately an assault on the identity and safety of Jewish students. Finally, anti-Semitism in general off campus. In Toronto, a member of Parliament's office was vandalized with anti-Israel and anti-Semitic graffiti, including the slogan, "From the river to the sea." In London, a man rammed his scooter into Orthodox Jews, shouting anti-Semitic slogans. One Orthodox woman suffered broken arm and bruises. Another was knocked to the ground with her 3-year-old daughter. The man was subsequently arrested. A group called Texas for Palestine is threatening the Jewish community in Houston. They have been giving out the names and phone numbers of rabbis and trying to intimidate the Jewish community there. They say they, quote, need to do a better job making Zionists unwelcome in their space. This, of course, is quite dangerous, especially on the heels of this People's Conference for Palestine, whose agenda openly stated that they wanted to, quote, isolate and expose Zionism by making it impossible to recover its image after this genocide. What this is, of course, showing, as confirmed by the Columbia University students boycotting Hillel and urging Jewish students to leave Hillel, is that these anti-Zionist quote unquote attacks on Israel are also a tool and mechanism to promote and subserve attacks on Jews in their local communities. That's the news, unfortunately. Tune in next week to see what fresh horrors next week will bring. Again, I'm your host, Andrew Pessin at andrewpessin.com, hoping everyone manages to keep it together to next time. Thanks.